Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight we first head to Kidal in northern Mali as French forces prepare to close a base used by troops of the Barkhane force. Paris's decision to reduce its presence in the country has caused diplomatic tensions. Also, Botswana's Court of Appeal starts hearing a government attempt to overturn a landmark ruling that decriminalised homosexuality in 2019. And voters head to the gearing up to Sunday's elections for the presidency in Cape Verde. Although the office has limited political influence, the electorate is still looking at big issues as they decide. One of the main political stakes is reviving the tourism industry. We take a closer look. But first, Mali's army's arrested soldiers accused of torturing civilians. Videos of men in military fatigues abusing people sparked outrage as they circulated online. Now, the UN's peacekeeping mission in the country said that this year alone, security forces are suspected of being behind the death, injury or disappearance of dozens of civilians. The country is currently run by a military junta, and the accusations add worry as the army prepares to take on more of a lead in containing a jihadist insurgency. France is planning on drawing down thousands of its troops from the region between now and 2023. This week, the reorganization of the Barkhane force saw French soldiers begin preparation to close a base in Kidal in Mali's north. Our correspondent reports.
In the heart of the Malian Gouma, the Gossi camp, it is one of the bases housing the Barkhane force, which the French authorities have decided to keep. The ones in Kidal, Tissalit and Timbuktu in the north of the country will be closed by the end of the year and are being handed over to the Malian army. While air support will be maintained, the 5,100 French troops in the Sahel will be reduced. European special forces deployed in the Tagupa task force will be in charge of supporting the Malian military.
The idea of reconcentrating the forces will help us to move forward. The idea is not to create a vacuum. The idea is to leave the responsibility of these areas to the Malian state. To avoid the risk of getting stuck in conflict, we need a response that is not only military.
However, 8 years of war against the jihadists have not enabled the authorities to take back a territory that is 2/3 out of their control. And for Amidou Cissé of the Patriots of Mali group, the time has come to turn the page on the French intervention.
Every day there are killings everywhere, and I really wonder what they are doing in Mali. Before their arrival, we were more than afraid. After they arrived, after 6 months, a year, we thought we would have peace. If they withdraw today, in 6 months or a year, we will suffer. But it is better to suffer than to remain in their hands forever.
While Bamako is looking for new partners and eyeing the potential Russian paramilitary Wagner group, the ex-rebels of the north insist that the answers to this multidimensional crisis must above all be Malian.
No matter how strong the foreign forces are, they will never be able to secure our home. We need local people, and this can only be done by implementing the peace agreement, with a reconstituted army that integrates all the fighters, an army that knows the ground and the population.
A reconstituted army that has struggled to become a reality since the signing of the Algiers peace agreement in 2015.
Now, sub-Saharan Africa is set to emerge from the recession sparked by the pandemic, but growth continues to lag behind developed economies. In part, the difference in recovery is linked to disparities in vaccine access and policy support. African countries have been able to disperse less than 1% of GDP to respond to the crisis. Now, earlier I asked the head of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, for her take on the continent's prospects.
Thank you, Georgia, for having me on the show and especially for asking about sub-Saharan Africa. This is the region that has been hardest hit by the economic fallout from COVID-19. It shrunk last year 1.7%. This is the worst performance of sub-Saharan Africa on record. And now when the world is growing, 5.9% this year. In Africa, this is only 3.7%. Whereas for the young people of Africa, for the future of Africa, this growth rate has to be 6, 7, 8, 10%. What does that mean, this slow growth? It means that countries are sinking under a burden of debt. Why? Because revenues are collapsing, and yet expenditures are going up to help households, to help the businesses hit by the crisis COVID generated. What can be done? Well, there is something countries can do themselves. It is now the time to tighten the loss of revenues that goes because taxes don't get collected, and to improve the quality of spending, focusing on the most vulnerable and where it would make a difference for the economy. Make it more transparent, make it so that there is a vibrant economy that comes out of this COVID crisis.
Kristalina Georgieva there speaking to me a little earlier on. Now, Botswana is appealing a 2019 ruling that decriminalised gay sex. The state's arguing that the court did not have jurisdiction to gauge whether public attitudes towards homosexuality had changed and that decriminalisation should be left up to Parliament. Campaigners, though, disagree. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
LGBT activists in Botswana will have to be patient. The country's High Court hearing is expected to last weeks. In 2019, it decriminalised homosexuality, but now the government is seeking to overturn this ruling. The state representative said,
People don't hate or dislike gays. They simply just don't approve of what they do. It's not the court's responsibility to gauge whether people's attitude towards gay sex has changed. That responsibility should be placed with Parliament to change laws.
Under Botswana's 1965 penal code, homosexuality was punishable by a jail term of up to 7 years. It has only been decriminalised for 2 years, and LGBT activists say it's vital that it remains this way.
A win out of the Court of Appeal is an affirmation of the fact that Botswana has indeed moved 20 steps ahead, not only of the former self of Botswana, but ahead of many other parts of the continent that still criminalize consensual adult same-sex and same-gender activity.
It hinges on dignity, the right to privacy, as well as humanity at its best, the right to choice, the right to live as who you are and who you choose to be.
Very few African countries have decriminalised homosexuality. They are Lesotho, Mozambique, Angola and the Seychelles. South Africa is the only nation on the continent to allow gay marriage, which it legalised in 2006.
A 2 times World Championship bronze medal athlete has been found stabbed to death at home in Kenya. 25-year-old Agnes Tirop finished 4th this year as she represented her country in the 5,000-metre event at the Tokyo Olympics. Police say that Tirop's husband's a suspect. On Wednesday evening, he was still missing. Last month, Tirop smashed the women-only 10-kilometre world record in Germany. President Uhuru Kenyatta has called her a Kenyan hero. Voters in Cape Verde are gearing up for Sunday's presidential election. However, the role is more symbolic as the country's government's led by the Prime Minister, but big issues are still at play. One of them is the race to revive the tourism industry. It represents about 25% of GDP, but because of the pandemic, last year the country lost 3/4 of visitors. Our correspondents report.
With its unspoiled coves, black sand beaches and colonial ruins, Cidade Velha, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is one of Cape Verde's treasures. For months, the island city has been desperately waiting for tourists to return. Braz Andrade owns this impressive hotel complex, but fewer than 1 in 3 rooms is occupied. The owners really felt the pinch.
Between salaries and fixed charges, water, electricity, the fixed charges come to €35,000 a month. If the situation continues, we will be forced to close down.
In Tarrafal, the main seaside resort on the island of Santiago, tourists have become a rarity. Chiara left Italy's grey skies behind for this white sandy beach.
Probably for a local economy, it must be better of more people, much people around. But for me as a tourist, it's beautiful like this.
The government has supported the tourism sector, but many still haven't been able to keep their head above water. Others had to change professions entirely. With no one to teach water sports to, Edson had to put away his surfboards. He opened this bar, which welcomes a mainly Cape Verdean clientele at weekends.
It's thanks to the money of local customers that we manage to survive and work. This allows us to survive until the foreign tourists return. Then we can think bigger for the bar.
The tourism industry is pinning its hopes on the return of European tourists at the end of the year, and tour operators say they're optimistic that peak season will once again act as a pillar of the Cape Verdean economy.
And finally, a Tanzanian cartoonist has been invited to join the ranks of Cartooning for Peace. The French organisation brings together press cartoonists from around the world to raise awareness of human rights issues. Mohamed Jumani Muiga, better known as Dr. Mehdi, was invited to France to take part in the Africa-France summit held in Montpellier last week. On Wednesday, he met with renowned French cartoonist Plantu. He's had to share the majority of his work outside of Tanzania because of restricted press freedoms there. So we'll leave you with some images of his work. Thanks for joining us. Do so again.